Hello, and welcome back to this week's Euler Room Weekend Jam, hosted by Cleary. And today we have a special guest, the person currently writing strudel code, Swan.
Hello. I'm here.
Hey, good to have you.
Good day, everyone. Glad to be here.
You're making some Phrygian melodies. Can you tell me about those?
Yeah, so I wanted to do an all-time signature, so I immediately just started typing as quickly as I could, just some pattern with 7 notes in it. Just to be ahead of everyone else to kind of guide the jam in that direction. As you'll find out, it did actually work for quite a while.
Oh, nice. So you said 7/4 time signature. Can you explain what that means?
That means like normal music terminology, you have 7 notes in a measure. In this case, in strudel terms, that is 7 notes in a cycle, which is like most Western music is in 4/4, aka
Yeah, for sure.
4 note. And I personally like kind of deviating from that standard, just as a, there's so much music in 4/4 already, why not experiment with other stuff? And I've noticed from like all the jamming I've done over time in strudel and Modal and stuff, that people generally are quite capable of adjusting to all-time signatures in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
That's,
I think there's a couple reasons for that. Before we get into maybe those speculations, I'm going to hard agree with you. 7/4 is a pretty nice one. It's my favorite. It's maybe coming in behind it is 5/4 and then 13, but 7's like the right amount of almost equal. You can get a good 3 groove and then a 4 right behind it, and it's addictive to have that 3 just coming a little bit shorter, or to have that 4 go a little bit longer than you expect every single time.
Yeah, and the last jam and the jam that you performed, I started writing looking at 8/4, 5/4, that didn't last too long. So I kind of did this go for again. But now this one, pretty nice. Just in terms of what I'm doing right here, I'm creating a drum pattern. I really like using this phrase, for example, as a band it has a whole bunch of samples of the sounds. I just like using the hi-hats. I have like 50 samples within the hi-hats already. So I usually just take random ones, the hi-hat function, rhythm those, rhythm basically takes a section and then generates numbers, and then repeats that section over and over, so it's not being random. So you don't have to manually choose all of the
Oh, that's interesting. So you're saying that, so first of all, there's this crate, crate is also the term for package, but this is a sound thing called crate. Okay, and nice, a bunch of hi-hats especially, and so you think there's approximately 50 hi-hats in here, so you think those are random, but the rhythm function is, I didn't know about this function. I've seen about rhythm a lot, and I'm like, why don't we pull rhythms out of the body?
Moving 4 cycles over and over and over again, starting from cycle 1. So if you were to start the song at cycle 0, and then play 4 cycles, then we arrive at the start of the rhythm. Then those 4 cycles are you can choose which section of the rhythm.
So is it like a seated?
I choose 0 over 0 to have 4.
Yeah, so it sounds like the first one determines like the starting position, and the second one determines the length.
Yes. And with randomized, you can kind of look at
Yeah, and in terms of audio frequency, this is more mid-range, whereas this is much more low register. The same thing in the audio, so I'll let you go from lowest to highest, just what my ears can hear, and I think above this bass we have the bass drum, more bass drum, so this is next up in the mids. And I think the snare drum in square Phrygian melody are maybe occupying the same mid-range frequency as about octave 3 to 4. Oh, it's coming in now. About SBD, the synthesized bass drum, my new favorite sample. Above the mid-range frequencies, we have, I hear some hi-hats. On the left, which clpa is giving us at the moment, and snorpfryer. Hi, snorpfryer, thanks for putting a phaser on the hi-hats. We always need phasers on our hi-hats. Wait, is there actually a phaser function? What? Is it missing everything? Yeah, what's up? I see what you mean. You're expanding the phrase length so that it feels less syncopated and more like the macro beat. Yeah. Well, it's kind of becomes syncopated, right? It's more of a steady beat. Yeah. Oh man, this marble dust is going nuts. Oh yeah, the visual very nice. Always fortunate to have savamala on the canvas. Awesome is great. I'm very well with Hydra. I've enjoyed it. Yeah, I used to do Hydra a lot too, for like small parties or events that we're putting on, and I noticed just anytime Hydra is in jams, it crunches up into the Punctual does not seem to do that. Like, savamala can do some very interesting things to the visuals, and it is always at performance. It never seems to log in and off. But if you do have that Hydra, it's just going to grab my browser. I know in Hydra there's 4 different cameras. Yeah, that would make sense. If Hydra could, instead of actually rendering 4 little canvases, it would keep it instead of creating into the object model. I'm hypothesizing too much about the source code. Okay, so let's finish that sounds good. There's a nice reverb that's really accentuated. I think it's this where this has room on it. It doesn't lay. It doesn't have it. You lay with it. Really the thing on the high level, so you can see the month for the very low to the line. The words of the notes in the pattern are slightly delayed, and then the last one is the high Oh, I see. Yeah, that's a nice touch. Those are higher notes. I see that we are using the in function to select not chromatic indexes, but the scale index in a decreasing scale. Therefore, the higher notes are going to produce higher frequencies. And like I said, that last one is passed into that selection. Nice. On top of that, same reverb. You can think of it like a reverb pedal if you play guitar, or if you play a synthesizer, or if you use production software. A reverb pedal has settings like the wet and dry mix, how much of it is included into the music. There's also settings for the duration of reverb decay, and also the size of the room. So, two sound parameters and then one mix parameter, where the sound parameters are the decay length, how long the reverb lasts, and the size of the room. And some initial models, we usually use perch sizes or halls to describe different reverb sizes. So the smallest reverb might just be a room. This would be any room of your bedroom, for example, and it's not a very large reverb. Then you might have a larger hall size reverb, which could be not like a hallway hall, but a dance hall, an intimate dance hall, or a large gathering hall. The that we're capturing and the pulse response when it's empty, and then the sound is going to be very live and reverberant in the space. And those are the range of parameters that we're turning on and off. Here we haven't turned them yet, but we can look at because That is true, yes. Scribble has definitely got such a nice API that if you just pick a scale like Swan said and get to it, you're probably going to be fine. Let's also look at this filtering effect. So we have a little pass filter here of 2,800. clpa is now editing this value to be a sine wave. So we're going to animate the value. Previously it was static. That means the model is stuck. But now we're going to create a robot hand that moves that knob for us. And the hand is going to turn in a very specific pattern. It's going to turn in a way that mimics a sine wave, and that means it's going to go up and down periodically in a wave that goes up and down and up and down and up and down in an even pattern, evenly selected. And clpa here is setting that range of up and down so that the down is 500 and the up is 9,000, so that we can fix the supersaw. Oh, what happened? We got a totally different line change. Finishing the thought, that robot hand is now setting the filter to move between the values of 500 to 9,000 automatically. I think the slow function is a great secret weapon for anyone who wants to get really good at complex compositions, because overlapping timescales is a great way to add complexity that doesn't hurt your ears. Yeah, Oh, okay. Oh, you're right. I can see it.
And now the audio broke.
Weege core. Yeah. Clearing is coined the term weege core for any moments that are especially jammy, like when the audio drops in the middle of your favorite part. Let's see, CLPA is doing. Oh, hello, everybody. CLPA is sometimes in this pattern. Sometimes by is another way to introduce randomness. So here, sometimes by is the most controllable way to select randomness. It says that half the time, we don't apply. So on the coin toss with every algorithm, we're going to silence it. I'm guessing that's what that does. Confirm my Swan, let's go mute it. Alright. We use sounds called breath. That would be a sample defined could be in this sound rate 450. Okay, so sorry, movie is giving us repetition. Right, for example, to unfurl itself is that to maybe use the times multipliers that extend the duration of the sound. Looking in and out of view, but I didn't see the clip call. Clip is a function that works only on synth right now you can put it to match up full time, but it's for time and it goes straight, it's 7 goes straight, 14 Is that right?
As long as those kind of match up, your mind just accepts that it's.
We score!
One thing that fixed my pitch score for like trans, the Goa trans.
Oh yeah.
These very punchy kicks that have a very high pitch envelope, they tune.
Exactly, yeah.
And then the tuning goes to the right value. It actually does make a lot of difference for the overall feel of the track. But it really depends on which kind of sample you're using. The stream is not lacking what's going on here.
Yeah, audio overload.
Audio overload, exactly.
I once played an example it's a bunch of drum samples. To me. We are coming towards the end of the session. I hope that it will clear up soon. It is pretty janky right now, and that is a better way to end such a good jam. I know there is. The tricky also is that as individual performers, we don't know if the jam is being recorded, because every local instance is its own own version of the jam.
Yeah. Like you said earlier, your machine hates Hydra.
Yeah.
Hydra is fine. Because heavy code sometimes it just hangs for a second.
Why it was glitching and crashing, and didn't have a solution though. There's a comment here, yeah, unclipped piano causes lag, oh yes. Great, thanks for fixing that.
It's still lagging, but yeah, that's one of
yeah, I think if I were to lay out a template of all the things you should do to every sample or every track that you put into the Strudel, you should always put post-scan on it, you should always put full ADSR or clip on it, you should always put some kind of filter on it, even if it's just safety filters like, 32 and 20,000. Oh, this is so glitchy, I can't even hear anything. Well, it was a great jam, really beautiful moments today, and this is just to remind us that jams are jams, and it's always an opportunity to try again next week, which I hope you will join us. If you've never been here, that's okay.